Hi everyone, I'm Kyle Bechet, and this is the AAF Exchange, a podcast from the American Action Forum, where experts provide clear, data-driven insights into today's economic and domestic policy issues. Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. On this episode of the AAF Exchange, the Fed's latest rate hike, the federal budget process, or lack thereof, and what to make of the fair tax proposal. Joining us to discuss all of this is AAF's Douglas Holtz-Eakin. Doug, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure as usual. This is great.
Yeah, we're still in the studio, which is great. Things went great the last time, so we're going to keep it going.
Excellent. Let's do it.
So, as you know, we've added a new segment. So first, we'll go into our new segment where Doug tells us what's on his mind. Hopefully in a minute or less, but we'll see how that goes. Doug, fire away.
Productivity. We got new data on productivity in the U.S. economy this morning. 3% growth in productivity in the fourth quarter. Productivity is huge because if you've got more productivity, you can produce more output and sell it, make more money, and it allows you to raise your wages without having to raise your prices. So take some of the inflation pressure out. Fantastic. Productivity is also a mystery. We don't understand it. If you look at this year versus last year, productivity fell by 1.5% because output only went up 0.8% and the hours worked went up 1.5. We have no idea what went on last spring. We added hundreds of thousands of jobs and GDP fell. So it's always good to see productivity go north, not south. And this is a good sign.
Awesome. But yeah, I mean, finally some good economic news. It's been a tough year for economic data. So finally, hopefully, things are looking for a brighter future. On the economy, let's turn to the Fed and its efforts to slow inflation. On Wednesday, the Fed announced a 25-point rate hike. What does this say about the state of the economy, and what does it suggest about the Fed's potential path in 2023?
So the Fed's stated reason for going 25 basis points instead of 50 is they are less likely to make an error. If they go in smaller increments, they can look at more data, move the rate up slowly. They maintain steadfastly it doesn't change the end point. Like if they think they're going to have to go to 5.5, they'll just do it in smaller steps, but they'll end up at 5.5 no matter what. So that's what they're up to. I think it's a reflection of what has been some clear softening in the economy in the second half of last year and early this year. We've seen all of the indicators sort of move down somewhat, but it doesn't mean that they think they've won the battle against inflation, because if you strip out the things that have moved a lot, egg prices up, energy down, and you take out the housing sector, inflation really hasn't moved at all. So the sort of core services inflation problem remains, and they think they have to keep going north to take care of that.
Yeah, it seems like they're still a long way away from that 2% target that they have. So, probably still a long road for them ahead. Is going at a slower pace, meaning that they want to still aim for that soft landing that we've heard a lot about, or is that just left their narrative altogether?
They would love a soft landing. If they could bring inflation down to 2% without having a recession, that would be an enormous success. They're just not guaranteeing it for anybody. And they've, pretty consistently warned that it could be the case that there will be some additional pain in the process getting back to 2% and that it will take time. I think that, especially the stock market gets ahead of itself on the timing of this. Right? This is not going to get solved by July. This is not going to get solved by a year from July. It's going to take a long time.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be talking about this well into the remainder of this year. So we'll leave it there for now. But let's switch gears. It's budget season, your favorite season of the year, I have to imagine, at least on paper. The White House recently said the president plans to release its budget, which is due the first Monday in February, sometime in March. Always great timelines with these things. While House Republicans will likely release their budget in March, there's that 10-year balance elephant in the room that they've promised. Meanwhile, Senate Democrats, from what I understand, plan to either wash their hands of the whole budgeting for the federal government exercise altogether. Doug, this sounds like a complete mess. What's going on?
On paper, in January, CBO puts out its January baseline economic and budget outlook. In February, the president submits his budget. Through February and into March, House passes a budget resolution, Senate passes a budget resolution. They confer, pass a joint resolution that governs the appropriations and entitlements and tax process, and off they go. None of that is happening these days. CBO hasn't put out its January baseline. If you check, it's February. President's not interested in sending his budget up until next month. The House is in principle, obligated to deliver some sort of budget resolution that balances in 10 years. That's the deal that was reported coming out of the speakership vote. I don't know how you do that. And if you do, you set up the possibility of just some real attack ads against you in the next election, because to vote for that is to vote for some pretty draconian cuts. I don't think the Senate's going to do a budget at all. The Senate Budget Committee has scheduled 8 hearings on the economics of climate change. So they're deeply enmeshed in the budget process these days. So it really is a disaster. And the shame is that we have serious budget problems. We have a fundamentally unsustainable trajectory. We have the need to preserve the solvency of Medicare and Social Security over the next decade. You should be working on that right now. So this is more than just not dotting the I's and crossing the T's. This is missing the important issue.
Yeah, so just for history purposes, when was the last time this process actually worked? Has it ever worked? I don't remember a time when it seems like the budget process, you went through the regular order and all of that.
Yeah, it's been broken for a long, long time. This process originates with the 1974 Budget Act, and since that time, once did they do all of the budget resolutions and things like that, and pass 12 appropriations bills. So it's the vast exception rather than the rule to follow this process.
Yeah, is there a fix to this? I mean, what's the carrot and stick approach to getting this process back on track? On track.
There's no real fix. I mean, the president has a statutory obligation to deliver a budget the first Monday in February, but there's no penalty for missing it, so they do. And this is the 3rd year in a row. So what you need is for Congress and the administration to decide to care. You know, in the late 90s, when we did balance the budget for the last time, people cared. Then President Clinton cared. His chief of staff, Erskine Bowles, was always on the Hill. The Senate Budget Committee, led by Pete Domenici, cared. You know, there was a let's get it done attitude that's missing right now. And if that returns, then they will in fact start doing things.
Well, some of these longer term budget issues, you know, the trust funds and all of that, will that help maybe get people to care? I mean, those are coming due.
I promise you that if the Medicare docs don't get paid and the Social Security checks don't show up in the mailbox, people are going to care. So yes, that clock is ticking. In my view, now is the time to work on that. If Social Security is going to bankrupt 10 years from now, you need to reform the program, and people who are working need to know the deal for their retirement planning. And so that should be happening right now. I think we're out of time. Obviously, Congress doesn't agree. They're not moving.
Interesting. All right, so at this point, let's take a break and do our segment called Fact of the Day Trivia. Fun, exciting.
Okay, I'm white-knuckling it over here.
Yeah. You were a little off on the last one, so hopefully we can get, you know.
We're not going to talk about that.
Dan Botch did confirm it for everybody that is keeping score at home. The Kaiser Family Foundation estimates that enrollment in Medicaid and CHIP grew by more than 19 million between February 2020 and September 2022. Doug, how big of an increase percent-wise is that bump in enrollment?
It's like 23%, something like that.
27%. So we'll give it to you, close to the pin.
Okay. That's an enormous increase. I think that's been. That's one of those quiet facts that just stuns you when you start wrapping your head around it. It's had the program grow by more than 25% just in a couple of years. It's just an enormous expansion.
Yeah, this was part of those pandemic-related reforms, right?
When they passed the Family First Coronavirus Act, they put in a provision that said you may not check people's eligibility in Medicaid. So whether you're eligible or not, you're on, and you stay on. So it's a continuous coverage thing. They didn't want people losing insurance in the pandemic, but there are lots and lots of people there who are making too much money to be eligible for Medicaid who will now be sort of asked to leave the rolls and go find other insurance.
Right. And so you wrote about this earlier, and the reason this is coming up is because some of these increases to the enrollment are going to come up as an issue here soon, right?
I think there's no question. If you're a person who believes in the original purpose of Medicaid, which was to cover children in the CHIP program and to cover low-income Americans, then it's time to review eligibility and get folks who are ineligible off the rolls. If you're someone who wants a march to single payer and universal coverage, this is a bad story, right? You don't want anyone losing their coverage of any sort, and so there's going to be a lot of back and forth over how this gets done in the States.
And what was the timing on that?
It's going to happen beginning in this spring, but they're going to phase it in over the next year.
Gotcha. All right. Interesting stuff. We'll have to keep an eye on that as we go forward. But let's wrap up with talk of this so-called fair tax proposal we're hearing so much about these days. First, what exactly would this proposal do? And second, what are your key concerns?
The fair tax is a national sales tax, a federal sales tax, that would be set to replace the existing individual income tax, payroll tax, corporation income tax, estate taxes, gift taxes. So get rid of all the other taxes and get rid of the IRS. It's a big selling point in the fair tax proposal. Have a national sales tax, then we have to have a sales tax bureau to collect it, but never mind that. And the sales tax, but in and of itself, is pretty regressive, right? Because low-income people have to pay everything. So they, quote, solve this by having what they call a prebate. If you're a low-income American, we mail you a check at the beginning of the month, and you'll have that money available to pay your federal sales tax, and thus we're exempting a certain amount of the purchases from tax. So that's the game plan. This proposal has been around for a long, long time. I first saw it in 2003. It rears its head periodically, and it runs into all sorts of tax policy problems. Number one, the rate is going to be very high. Most guesses are it's going to be in the mid-30s to actually accomplish its purpose, and that's an invitation for evasion. And so will you, in fact, collect the revenue that you think when you have a rate that high? Lots of examples of sales tax evasion in the states. Speaking of the states, they're not going to be very happy if they have a state sales tax that the federal government's going to Bigfoot them with this enormous sales tax. So they're stealing the state tax base. That's going to give you real political problems. Third, the regressivity is a real thing. The way most sales taxes solve regressivity is to exempt items from tax, food, for example, so that something important for basic survival doesn't get taxed. This tries to mail this check out. It is not a reasonable thing to expect us to identify those who are eligible, identify where they live, and once a month send them a check of the appropriate amount. That's a bridge too far. It just won't work. And so it's real popular because it gets rid of the IRS. It's not practical in any way.
Yeah, it seems to me that in the short term, it would be a bad idea with inflation happening right now. But even in the long term,
you mean having the price level go up by 30% would bother you?
Yeah, I mean, I do like to buy things other than food, and I need the latest iPhone, and that seems like it would be a huge burden on the economy as we're trying to get people to buy things in the long term.
I think if you snapped your fingers into fair tax January 1, 2024, you got yourself a recession. So no thanks.
Yeah, like you said, it's come up before. I think I remember it in the 2008 campaign for president when Governor Mike Huckabee brought it up back then. But other than getting rid of the IRS, is there selling points around this?
The advocates like to think that it will solve evasion problems because everyone has to pay it when they buy something, and so you can't squirrel your money away in the Caymans and things like that. So you hear that claim. I think there's a comparable avoidance/evasion problem with a rate that high on a sales tax. You start getting underground black market sales instead of taxable sales. So, that's the other appeal. I'm not convinced.
Interesting. All right. Well, that concludes everything that I had to talk about today. But before I let you go, I'm not going to bring up last weekend's championship games because you've already heard my feelings in the office about this. But what are your thoughts about the upcoming Super Bowl?
Well, I think it's going to be a good game. I really do. I'm looking forward to it. I don't know who I'm going to root for. The Eagles are from the wrong part of Pennsylvania, and the Chiefs are from the wrong division in the AFC. They're not the Steelers. So, I hope it's a good game. I hope we can enjoy it.
Yeah, I think it'll be one of the better games we've seen in a long time, but I just can't pick a team to root for on this one. I mean, I'm a Patriots fan, as you know, and most people know, so that takes Mahomes out of it. The Eagles fans, I have a recent history with them in Super Bowls, so I also can't root for them. So I don't know where I'm going to land on this one.
In the end, I know I'm going to end up rooting for Jalen Hurts. I've admired what he's done in his career. I mean, he was discarded at Alabama in a what I thought was a really callous and unfeeling fashion, and he made himself into an NFL quarterback. I think that's pretty admirable.
His rise has been great. I mean, to watch and see as a pure football fan, he's just wearing the wrong jersey in my mind. So we'll see. Doug, thanks again for joining us, and I'm looking forward to the next podcast. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Tune back in for our next episode, where our experts will provide clear, data-driven insights into today's economic and domestic issues. I'd also encourage you to check out any of the links in our show notes, and also follow us on social media to learn more about AAF. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or Google Play.